Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. You must have heard about the ISIS-K, the Islamic State of Khorasan province. It's an affiliate of the Islamic State that wants to establish its caliphate in Afghanistan, Pakistan and India. With the rise of the Taliban in Afghanistan, the ISIS-K has suddenly become very active. It's been carrying out terrorist attacks. And the terrorist-turned government of Taliban has been fighting them. The question is, how did the ISIS-K suddenly find the wherewithal to mount such attacks? Well, now we have an answer. The United States of America, that's the answer. The ISIS has America to thank for its newfound prowess. Reports say Afghan military forces and spies trained by the Americans have joined the ISIS. It's a serious and dangerous development, a repeat of what happened in Iraq. And very bad news for India and the region. The Pentagon fears an ISIS attack on them in 6 months, and America is thousands of miles away, remember. So the region has a lot to worry about. On Gravitas tonight, we'll discuss how the US has powered the ISIS Khorasan and what it means for the world. Also on the show, the COP26 has begun. 400 private jets land in Glasgow, producing 13,000 tons of carbon dioxide. So much for climate action. Why is French President Macron picking fights with allies? He's called the Australian Prime Minister a liar. He's sparring with the British over fishing waters. We'll discuss that. A new fatwa says cryptocurrency is haram. It has been issued by the world's largest Islamic organization. We'll bring you the reactions. And North Korea is suffering a serious food shortage. Its leader Jong-Un offers a bizarre solution. He says people must breed and eat black swan. We begin with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Even as global leaders sit down to tackle climate change at the COP26 summit, a new report says that the past 7 years are on track to be the 7 warmest ever. The World Meteorological Organization says the world's sea level rise accelerated since 2013 to a new high, with continued ocean warming. A day after the Pakistan government and the outlawed group Tehreek-e-Labbaik reached an agreement following intervention of Pak Army Chief General Bajwa, Pakistan media reports that the government may even delist TLP as a banned group soon. Australia recognized India's Covaxin jab for travel to the country. The development comes as the country opened its borders to travel after 18 months. Millions of Australians can now travel without the need for a permit or quarantine upon arrival in Australia. Tigrayan forces claim to capture a strategic town in Ethiopia's Amhara region. The Tigray People's Liberation Front says it had seized Kombolcha and its airport. The town is located around 235 miles from the capital, Addis Ababa. A 24-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after he attacked multiple people with a knife on a train in Tokyo. This happened amid Halloween celebrations, and witnesses say the suspect was wearing a costume of the Joker from the Batman franchise. At least 17 people were injured. Shanghai Disneyland shuts down for 2 days over a single coronavirus case. Reports say that Chinese authorities confined thousands in the theme park and tested more than 33,000 people after one visitor from the day was found to be COVID positive. In a big victory for Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, who took over less than a month ago, his Liberal Democratic Party secured more than 233 lower house seats and can now govern without its coalition partner. At least 9 firefighters killed and 1 injured when a cave collapsed, trapping people in Sao Paulo state in Brazil. Around 75 firefighters worked through the day on rescue operations. Tottenham have sacked manager Nuno Espirito Santo after just 4 months in charge. Spurs were beaten 3-0 by Manchester United on Saturday, their 5th defeat from just 10 Premier League games so far this season. Santo was only in charge for 17 matches in all and managed 9 wins to go with 7 losses. Former Juventus, Chelsea and Inter Milan manager Antonio Conte is the leading contender to replace him. The International Handball Federation has bowed to pressure and altered its clothing rules for women to allow bike shorts and tank tops instead of bikini bottoms and crop tops. The change comes in the wake of widespread criticism and accusations of sexism after an incident in July when the Norwegian women's beach handball team was fined for wearing shorts like their male counterparts during a tournament in Bulgaria.
America's botched-up exit from Afghanistan has breathed new life into another monster. It's called the Islamic State Khorasan, or the ISIS-K. America's exit has revived this group. It has carried out at least 7 major attacks in Afghanistan. ISIS-K was behind the year's deadliest terrorist attack, the Kabul airport suicide bombing. The same group now targets a mosque almost every Friday. For months, the world has been wondering, how did the ISIS-K rise so quickly? How has it managed to stay one step ahead of the Taliban? Turns out, America's exit did not just revive the ISIS-K, it gave them a ready-made fighting force. Remember the Afghan military, the one that the Americans trained and equipped? The force that crumbled before the Taliban? Well, many of them have managed to escape and they're now joining the Islamic State Khorasan. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you how the Islamic State is mounting a comeback in Afghanistan thanks to the Americans. Here's what we know so far. The ISIS-K has recruited a few former Afghan soldiers. These are highly skilled soldiers we're talking about. Who are these men? Former intelligence officers and members of elite military units in Afghanistan. They bring a lot to the table for the ISIS Khorasan. They add expertise in intelligence gathering. They can train terrorists in warfare techniques. These officers were trained by the Americans. Now that training will benefit the ISIS-K. In fact, they're already at work. An Afghan army officer was killed a week ago. He had joined the ISIS-K and died in a clash with the Taliban. As an army officer, he was posted in Gardez. There he commanded a weapons and ammunition depot for the Afghan forces. In the last few weeks, the ISIS-K has added 4 more former Afghan soldiers to its ranks. This includes a former senior member of the Afghan Special Forces. Why are they joining the ISIS-K? Well, we could think of 3 reasons. Number 1 is protection from the Taliban. Number 2 is money. And number 3 is revenge. And for some of these people, revenge is the main reason why they're joining the ISIS. They have an axe to grind with the Taliban. You see, soon after they took power, the Taliban targeted former Afghan soldiers. We reported many such stories. They searched their homes. They demanded absolute surrender from the military. The Afghan military had collapsed. The resistance forces too had been crushed. The soldiers had nowhere to go, so they joined the ISIS Khorasan. It's the only armed group that can fight the Taliban today in Afghanistan. So these soldiers decided to enroll. And the numbers are only expected to go up in the coming days. Thousands of them are unemployed right now. This includes intelligence officers, soldiers, police personnel, and they hadn't been paid their salaries for months. So more than a job, they need protection from the Taliban. At the moment, ISIS-K promises that and more. And this is a dangerous trend, one that we've seen before, not in Afghanistan, but in Iraq. The Americans, remember, took down the Saddam Hussein regime in Iraq. They were hunting for weapons of mass destruction. They did not find any. All they did was destroy a state and dethrone a dictator. The American invasion created a power vacuum. The Islamic State filled it. Do you know who helped the ISIS in Iraq? The former generals of Saddam Hussein. Consider this. In 2015, the ISIS had 40 leaders at the top, 40. And more than 25 of these leaders had served in the Iraqi military in the past. We looked up their backgrounds. Almost all of them were former officers of Saddam Hussein's army, like Abu Omar al-Baghdadi. He was the head of the Islamic State in Iraq. Before that, he was an Iraqi policeman. Members like these recruited more Baathists into their ranks, the likes of Abu Muslim al-Afari al-Turkmani, Abu Ali al-Anbari, and Abu Ayman al-Iraqi. These are all members of the Iraqi forces. They were members of the Iraqi forces, and they ended up being senior leaders of the Islamic State. Now, the same is happening in Afghanistan. It's going the Iraq way. The Islamic State Khorasan is following the very same playbook. The US went to Afghanistan to fight the enemies it created, like the Taliban and Osama bin Laden. They've left 20 years later, leaving behind a perfect playground for violence. They've left a ready-made workforce for the ISIS Khorasan. These terrorists then wasted no time. They've launched an offensive to create a new caliphate. The return of the ISIS could pull American forces back into Afghanistan. In fact, the Pentagon says they expect an attack in 6 months. So much for America's war on terror, destroying countries, creating war machines, and feeding terrorist groups. Meanwhile, a new report says that Pakistan will be the first target of the ISIS Khorasan. This report quotes an ISIS leader saying that they will first destroy Pakistan. Now, we cannot confirm that report, and we say it won't even come to that. You don't need the ISIS Khorasan to destroy Pakistan. They will do it themselves. Pakistan is on self-destruct mode. The economy is tanking. Elon Musk, you would know, has more money now than Pakistan's GDP. The currency is weakening, debts are mounting, the IMF is rejecting their loans, radicalism is on the rise, Islamists are running riot, and the army may be planning another coup. There are strong indications that the Pakistan army could overthrow the puppet prime minister they installed. It's been the buzz for a while now, and we've been reporting for weeks how civil-military relations in Pakistan have been decaying. The government and the army are at odds. They're fighting over some key appointments, like the chief of the ISI, the Inter-Services Intelligence, Pakistan's rogue spy agency. Imran Khan wanted to retain the current chief. Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid, that's his name. He's a loyalist. He helped Imran Khan win the 2018 election. He was also pivotal in recent interactions with the Taliban. So General Hamid is Imran Khan's man. But the army considered him an institutional liability, a threat to their political arrangement, a man leaning more towards the government than the army. So the generals decided to replace him. Imran Khan protested. He did not approve of the army's choice. For at least a month, he stalled this appointment. He refused to sign a notification confirming the appointment of a new chief. Well, eventually he relented because the fear of a backlash was too strong. So last week, the army's choice prevailed. Lieutenant General Nadeem Anjum was finally appointed as the new ISI chief. Nadeem Anjum. His appointment may have ended the army's tussle with Imran Khan for the moment, but the crisis, we say, is not over. Far from it. Because what Imran Khan has done is interfere in military promotions, a domain that the Pakistan army has fervently guarded. Nobody in Pakistan, not even the Prime Minister, or should I say especially not the Prime Minister, gets away by humiliating the army like this. We know how this ends. Imran Khan should know how this ends. Well, here's a quick recap of Pakistani history for him. In the year 1972, a year after the secession of East Pakistan as Bangladesh, or the liberation of Bangladesh, Pakistani Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto dismissed 2 military chiefs. 4 years later, in 1976, he forcefully retired 7 army generals. 1 year later, 1977, there was a coup. Pakistani Army Chief General Zia-ul Haq overthrew the government of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. The Prime Minister was sent to the gallows in Rawalpindi. He was executed in 1979. 2 decades later, another Prime Minister tried interfering in the military's affairs. His name is Nawaz Sharif. In 1999, he tried appointing the ISI director as the army chief and relieved General Pervez Musharraf of his duties. Within 17 hours of Nawaz Sharif's attempt, Musharraf staged a coup. He took control of all government institutions. He placed the leadership under house arrest. He assumed the role of the president of Pakistan. Cut to 2021, Imran Khan tried sustaining his loyalist as the ISI chief. He tried to go against the will of the army. So here's the question. Will the current army chief, Qamar Javed Bajwa, do to Imran Khan what Zia did to Bhutto and Musharraf did to Nawaz Sharif? Also, can he do the same? You see, the Pakistan army is still very powerful. But the constitution of Pakistan has changed. So the army can carry out a coup. But giving it constitutional legitimacy is going to be tough. Let me explain this. Both Zia-ul Haq and Parvez Musharraf were able to get the Pakistani Supreme Court to legitimize their coup. But Bajwa may not be able to do that. Because in 2010, there was a constitutional amendment in Pakistan. The court no longer has the power to legitimize a coup. The Constitution of Pakistan now says that anyone who aids or legitimizes a coup shall be held guilty of treason, punishable by a death penalty. Now, I'm not sure the army cares very much about the Constitution. It exercises all kinds of extra constitutional powers. But they like the facade of legitimacy. So here's the other option to get rid of Imran Khan for them. They will use their stooges, extremist and radical outfits. They will use them to destabilize the government of Imran Khan. And this won't be a first for them. The army is experienced in this field. In the 1970s, the army used the Pakistan National Alliance, a radical religious outfit, to destabilize the government of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. In the 1980s, the army funded the Islamic Democratic Alliance against the government of Benazir Bhutto. It's 2021. Another extremist outfit is on the loose. It's called the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, TLP. It has been running riot for weeks, seeking the expulsion of the French ambassador. They've held the government hostage. They've now struck a deal brokered by the army. The Tehreek-e-Labbaik has been delisted or is going to be delisted. Islamabad has lifted its ban on the organization, some reports say. The protests have stopped. But it's a precarious peace. There's no guarantee if this peace will hold. It all depends on how happy Imran Khan keeps the army. I say this because the Tehreek-e-Labbaik owes its very existence to the Pakistani military. In 2018, it was brought to the mainstream by the Pakistani military. Why? To destabilize the PMLN government through protests and blockades. 3 years later, the kind of violence this outfit is indulging in makes it amply clear that it has been instructed to do so. There is no mistaking the army's hand behind their actions. Imran Khan should be a worried man today. For a prime minister who is believed to have been selected and installed by the army, he has clearly overplayed his hand. We'll be tracking that story. For our next story, though, I'm going to take you back 30 years. The 90s were a momentous era. Economies were booming, the internet was bringing the world together, growth was the name of the game. But it was an unsustainable growth. So what did the world leaders do? They huddled together in Brazil. The 1992 Earth Summit at Rio de Janeiro was one of its kind. Countries came together. They agreed that resources were being exploited. Climate action was the new chant. Thus began an international cooperation to tackle emissions.
Another thing that's changed since Rio in 1992 is that greenhouse gas concentrations have continued to rise, of course.
The Earth Summit was an important precursor to COP1. Today, the COP26 summit is underway. The coveted climate summit of our era, as many call it. But that's the thing with these summits. They promise a lot, they deliver very little. COP, by the way, stands for Conference of Parties, COP. It's an annual meeting of 197 countries. It is meant to discuss climate solutions. Since its inception, the COP has been failing to deliver, and I'm not the only one calling it a charade. The UK Prime Minister agrees.
No one conference could ever change that. If summits alone solved climate change, then we wouldn't have needed 25 previous COP summits to get where we are today.
The main goal is to deliver on the Paris promises, a pledge to cut down greenhouse emissions. The goal was to keep the planet from heating up more than 1.5 degrees. But the problem is, we are far away from that. Even in the best case scenario, temperatures will rise well above 2 degrees, and this is the best case scenario. This time, failure is not an option.
So, as we open this much anticipated climate conference, we are still heading for climate disaster. Young people know it. Every country sees it. Small island developing states and other vulnerable ones live it. And for them, failure is not an option. Failure is a death sentence.
Here's what else leaders plan to achieve over the next 11 days. 1. Protect communities and natural habitats. 2. Mobilize finance with an eye on climate change. 3. Cooperate and work together on climate action. And of course, try and achieve the much talked about net zero emission. Will these leaders be able to deliver? Well, that's a billion-dollar question right there. The official website of COP26 says it is uniting the world to tackle climate change. Glasgow is the moment for countries to update their plans. What are these plans? Developed countries want developing countries to pay for climate change. They want to shrug off their historic responsibility. It's a plan without any roadmap. The West wants to achieve net zero without telling the world how to. In fact, the whole event is being called climate hypocrisy. Consider this. There are some 100 world leaders flying down to Glasgow. They're using a total of 400 private jets. 400 private jets. These jets blasted 13,000 tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere in total. How much is 13,000 tons of CO2? The amount of carbon emitted by 1,600 Scots in a whole year. They've done with one visit. The total carbon footprint of an average person is around 8 tons in 1 year. Now, these leaders have emitted 13,000 tons just to assemble for one summit. So much for tackling climate change. But not everyone here is selling false dreams. Here's a country that's also talking sense. That's India, and I'm not being biased, I'm just stating facts. India is looking at implementation and solutions rather than talking about net zero. It is launching 2 key initiatives. One of them will be under the International Solar Alliance. It's the ISA. The second one is under the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, or the CDRI. The focus is on a project called the Green Grids Initiative. It was initiated by the International Solar Alliance. It was launched to promote solar energy. The goal is to create a global solar grid. I know it all sounds very complex. It is in fact very simple. The sun is always shining in some part of the world. So if we have a solar grid spanning countries, power can be transferred from one place to another. It's as simple as that. And this is not a new idea either. It has been talked about in the past. But this is the first attempt to create a global network. And leading this initiative is India. No jargon, no net zero, a concrete proposal to switch to sustainable energy. Way better than the unrealistic net zero target sold by many. This is the 26th edition of the COP Summit. We've seen 25 of them before this, and we can tell you how this one will go. It's almost like a game of diplomatic poker. The rich will have a heavy hand against the poorer nations. Climate villains will be called out. Speeches will include chants of net zero. Proposals will be drawn. They will be met with counter proposals. Negotiations will break down. At the end of it, all we may have is a lofty statement. But let me remind you something tonight. The time for climate action is now, as all of these leaders also keep saying. This very moment, today, not 2 weeks of political haggling later. Let's take you straight to Glasgow now to see what's happening there. We are joined by my colleague Chris Jones, who's reporting from Glasgow. Chris, it's been called climate hypocrisy. It's been called Flop 26, not COP 26, because we know major countries have already refused to make fresh commitments to cut emissions unless the developed world offers more funds to support the transition. What do you see on the ground? Is there optimism?
Well, it's from the experts we've kind of spoken to, it's clear that there isn't really much optimism that the targets that are being set by the countries here will be met, but there is optimism that there is work going on towards meeting those targets. Today we've heard the likes of Boris Johnson, the likes of world-leading environmentalist Sir David Attenborough. We've also heard from Antonio Guterres, and they've been quite damning in what they've said in terms of what's been done so far. Antonio Guterres, in fact, is quoted saying, "We're digging our own graves by not acting quickly enough." And also I spoke to the London Mayor Sadiq Khan only last week, and he said that the ambition to keep the rise of the Earth's temperature to just 1.5 degrees has not been met. In fact, it's closer to 2.7, and that is a kind of a figure that the world leaders here will really want to kind of get down to that 1.5 degree target. If not, it could be too late, and it could ruin the future for generations, not just here in the UK, but all over the world.
One of the headlines that we're also running is that 400 private jets have landed in Glasgow, producing 13,000 tons of carbon dioxide. So is this climate action or climate hypocrisy? Do you need such grand summits when they deliver very little? What do people in Glasgow have to say?
Well, you're right, there has been some hypocrisy here, and of course there's been a lot of travel to get to Glasgow. In fact, across the UK, many journalists and delegates struggled to get to Glasgow from London. There was incidents with trees on the tracks that meant that one of the biggest stations in London, Euston, had to be closed. Therefore, quite a few people managed to get flights and flew to Glasgow. But like I said, there are kind of statements that have been put out there by world leaders that you can choose to believe or not, and time will really tell whether it's kind of all talk or whether action will be put into place to really save the planet on its from going on its current course towards a climate crisis.
Right, Chris Jones, thanks very much for that update from Glasgow. For the moment, shifting focus to France, which continues to spar with its allies, two countries in particular, the United Kingdom and Australia. For the last 2 months, both of them have been at the receiving end of some serious French fury. The rift is now widening. How did it begin in the first place? With the formation of AUKUS. It's a trilateral security alliance between Australia, the United Kingdom and the United States. AUKUS, that's AUKUS for you. The alliance was formed, or rather announced, in September. Before this, Australia was to buy submarines from France. That was the plan. It was a deal worth $66 billion. But after AUKUS, Australia scrapped that deal with France. It said it would buy those submarines, not from France, but from the US. Of course, France was upset. It accused Australia of stabbing it in the back. It recalled its ambassador from Australia. Diplomatic ties between Paris and Canberra have been in the deep freeze since. Now, over the weekend, the French president took aim at Australia once again. He accused the Australian Prime Minister of lying. This happened in Rome. At the recently concluded G20 Summit, a group of Australian journalists approached the French president and they asked him to reflect on the submarine scuffle. He joined them for an impromptu chat. And what did he say? Well, quite a lot. He said France has a lot of respect for Australia, that it shares a lot of values with Australia, but Australia has not really reciprocated. It hasn't been consistent in its values. This is when a reporter asked Macron if he thinks that Scott Morrison lied to him about the submarine deal. You have to watch the response.
I have a lot of respect for your country. I have a lot of respect and a lot of friendship for your people. I just say when we have respect, you have to be true and you have to behave in line and consistently with this value.
You think he lied to you?
I don't think. I know.
I don't think I know. The conviction with which Macron said this is reflective of the decaying ties between the two countries. The President of France openly called the Prime Minister of Australia a liar. Such public display of displeasure is rare among world leaders. This was an extraordinary charge in diplomatic terms. By the way, Macron did not stop there. He went on to accuse Scott Morrison of disrespecting Australia's allies and taking actions that are detrimental not just to the Prime Minister's reputation, but of the entire country. And to make himself absolutely clear, he said all of this in English, not French.
Your country was shoulder to shoulder with us during the wars. You had fighters with us when our freedom was at stake. We do have the same value. So I think we have to honor this common path and these common values. But I think you can have disagreements. I do respect sovereign choices. But you have to respect allies and partners, and it was not the case with this deal. And I think this is detrimental to the reputation of your country and your prime minister.
Well, he certainly did not beat around the bush. He did not sugarcoat things. He put it very bluntly that he no longer trusts Scott Morrison. Is the feeling mutual, though? The answer is no. Australia wants to patch up. It wants France to get over what happened and move on. At the same time, it also says that it has no regrets. It says it did not steal an island or deface the Eiffel Tower. All it did was get out of a contract. Listen to the statement by Australia's Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce.
There were stories that were being floating around the paper long before the cancellation of the submarine contract. And that's a really important word. It was a contract. We didn't steal an island. We didn't deface the Eiffel Tower. It was a contract. And contracts have terms and conditions. And one of those terms and conditions and propositions is that you might get out of the contract. You got out of that contract. And, I understand the sentiment. I understand the views of the French people. And I'm certain that with time, like all things, we can get over this and move on.
Get over this and move on, he says. We did not deface the Eiffel Tower. It sounds like a high school spat, except that it's serious. Australia terminated a deal with France only to sign another one with the United States, making Macron lose face in an election year. Obviously, he's upset. France will head to polls in April 2022. Macron's prospects of winning look slim. Is he picking fights then on purpose? Yes, says the United Kingdom. The Brits too are engaged in a tussle with the French. This one's over fishing rights. France is seizing British trawlers that are entering its territorial waters. And this tussle, by the way, began right after Brexit. Britain sought greater access to fishing waters. France, along with the European Union, objected. They began debating on how much access the UK should be granted. The debate remained unresolved, but after the formation of the AUKUS, it turned into a dispute. France started blocking British boats. Some of its ports also denied them access. And this has been happening for weeks now. So Britain has now issued an ultimatum. It has asked France to back down or face legal action under the Brexit trade deal. The British Foreign Minister says the French are behaving unfairly and they need to mend their ways in the next 48 hours. She also suggested that Macron's actions might have something to do with next year's presidential election in France. Well, they may or may not, but Macron has been unrelenting. And he had a win this weekend. He extracted a public apology from the President of the United States.
I think what happened was, to use an English phrase, what we did was clumsy. It was not done with a lot of grace. I was under the impression certain things had happened that hadn't happened. But I want to make it clear, France is an extremely valued partner.
And Macron's battles are just one example. They show how deeply divided our world leaders are. They met this weekend for the G20 Summit. What did the meeting achieve? Not very much, frankly, except for a deal to tax big tech. The G20 had little to show for in terms of progress. The leaders could not hide their sharp differences, even in front of the cameras. Our next report recaps the G20 Summit for you.
They shook hands, hugged each other, visited historic sites, even threw coins into a world-famous fountain. The G20 Summit this year didn't disappoint the cameras. The world's most powerful leaders were meeting after 2 years. Some were clearly out of practice. Like British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, he arrived late for the traditional family photograph. Thankfully for Johnson, his peers saved him a spot. One leader wasn't so lucky. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro was bumped off the family photo. The leaders in attendance didn't want to mix with Bolsonaro. The Brazilian president was isolated, even in the conference room. Look at how he was ignored. It isn't clear why Bolsonaro was given the cold shoulder. Some say it was because of his poor response to the pandemic. Others pointed fingers at Bolsonaro's security detail. They had punched a journalist during the event. Brazil wasn't the only country in the headlines for the wrong reasons. The organizers had to deal with several no-shows.
But are we doing enough to support them?
Leaders of 4 countries, China, Russia, Japan, South Africa and Mexico, skipped the event. As a result, the summit failed to deliver tangible results. The G20 remained split on climate change. They committed to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, but failed to agree on ways to reduce emissions. The G20 vowed to support vaccinations for the Wuhan virus. They want to back the World Health Organization and vaccinate at least 40% of the world's population by the end of 2021. But without the supply of shots, this target seems like a long shot. The G20 also discussed issues like the global supply chain disruptions, the rising energy prices, and the global economic recovery after the pandemic. But they couldn't come up with a game plan to tackle the problem. Once again, the G20 offered a lot of photogenic moments. But the leaders have little to show for in terms of progress. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Let's shift our focus to North Korea, where millions are starving. There's a food shortage. Kim Jong-Un, the leader, cannot hide the crisis this time, and he cannot get the food from outside. So his regime has come up with some bizarre solutions. What's Kim Jong-un's plan to end the food shortage in his country? Pyongyang wants North Koreans to eat black swans if they're hungry. Here's a report.
North Korea is starving. Kim Jong-un says the situation is grim. This is the solution he is offering to his citizens. Black swans. Pyongyang has unleashed a new propaganda drive. The state mouthpiece claims black swans are delicious. They have medicinal value and they will improve people's lives. Pyongyang says a new center has been opened to rear black swans. This is a cruel joke on North Koreans. Millions of them are going hungry. How will some black swans fill their stomachs? Pyongyang knows this. North Korea has been perpetually struggling with chronic food shortages. It can't get the food, so it is dishing out old propaganda. The Kim regime has a history of promoting exotic meats as solutions for food shortages. In the 1990s, North Korea suffered a devastating famine. Kim Jong-il, the father of Kim Jong-un, came up with a response. He promoted rabbit and ostrich meat. Within months, Kim Jong-il was exposed. At least 500,000 North Koreans died due to famine. Some say the death toll was as high as 3 million. A similar crisis is now looming over North Korea. The United Nations says vulnerable children and the elderly could starve. Kim Jong-Un has asked the country to eat less till 2025. The North Korean dictator is getting large shipments from China. But if the past is any proof, any humanitarian aid is unlikely to reach the starving people, as Kim continues to lead a lavish life. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Our next story is from Greece. The country's Supreme Court has banned two controversial concepts, two rituals that are central to Islamic and Jewish religious practices, Halal and Kosher. We'll tell you the reason behind the court's decision, but first let's understand what these concepts really are. Halal and Kosher, we've all heard of them in the context of meat and dairy. You must have seen these words labelled on food packets. You must have seen them written in bold outside certain eateries. These concepts date back thousands of years. But what do they really mean? Kosher is a term that describes any food which is prepared in compliance with Jewish dietary laws. It comes from the Hebrew word kashrut. It simply means proper or fit. Now, this word is mentioned several times in the Torah. To be kosher, a mammal has to have split hooves like cows, sheep, goats, and deer. Under kosher guidelines, these animals should only be slaughtered by a Jew, and any food product classified as meat cannot be consumed with dairy products. Plus, utensils used to prepare meat and dairy are also supposed to be kept separate. Now, there are a range of other guidelines, but this is the simplest explanation for what is kosher. As for halal, it describes anything that is in compliance with Islamic laws, not just food, but also drinks and matters of daily life. It's an Arabic word which translates into permissible or lawful. Anything that's not halal is called haram, meaning prohibited or unlawful. In the context of food, halal diets allow meat from only certain types of animals. It also follows a certain procedure when it comes to slaughter. But it doesn't prohibit the mixing of meat with dairy. Now, this too is a simple definition. Just like kosher food, there are several other practices and rituals, but this should be enough to understand what halal and kosher are. Now, in Greece, both these concepts have been banned. The decision has been taken by the Hellenic Council of State, which is the apex body in the country, apex judicial body in the country, the top court. It says that both these practices are inhumane because they require animals to be killed without administering them with anesthesia, meaning making the animal lose its sensation to pain. The court says that religious preparation of animal products does not outweigh animal welfare. It has refused to allow exemptions to its order. It has asked the Greek government to regulate the relationship between animal rights and religious freedom. It has triggered a backlash too. Jewish groups in Europe are outraged. They're calling it an infringement of their freedoms. And Greece, by the way, is not the first country to do so. In recent years, several European countries have imposed bans on ritual slaughter. Sweden, Slovenia, Estonia, Denmark, and Finland, for example. Their decisions are not really politically motivated or aimed at targeting a particular community, they say. These bans are part of an ongoing struggle between animal rights activists, animal welfare activists, and religious bodies. The activists say that stunning animals before killing them is a more humane way of doing it. The religious bodies say that this is an attack on their faith and customs and way of life. So the debate continues. Well, here's what we say. If animal welfare really is a concern, then shouldn't letting all animals live be the goal? Think about it. For the moment, we want to talk about cryptocurrency. Is it un-Islamic? Is it haram? This question is doing the rounds in Indonesia, the country's top religious organization. It has issued a fatwa against the digital currency. The body has equated it with gambling, calling it haram or forbidden. Does this mean that Indonesia will ban crypto? Our next report explores.
Cryptocurrency has often been called the future of money. The pace at which it is making headway across the world has left many wondering if it will replace traditional modes of payment forever. In Indonesia, it has left clerics wondering if it is halal. Yes, Indonesia is debating whether cryptocurrency is Islamic or not. The debate ensued after a religious council in the country issued a fatwa against the use of cryptocurrency, declaring it forbidden under Islamic law. This body's name is Nahdlatul Ulama. It is said to be the largest Islamic organization in the world, with an estimated 90 million members. On Saturday, this body said that cryptocurrency is not legal under the Islamic Sharia law, asking authorities to declare the digital currency haram or forbidden. What explains this decision? Two things: the volatility of cryptocurrency and the fact that it can be used to commit fraud. Indonesian clerics say these factors mean that cryptocurrency cannot be classified as a legitimate investment. They have deemed it to being similar to gambling, another activity that is forbidden under Islamic law. Their remarks have triggered a flurry of responses on social media. Indonesians are calling the fatwa cringe-worthy. They say it defies logic, as the country recently incorporated fiat money into its payment system. They are asking why one form of digital currency is halal and another is being called haram. The clerics are yet to clarify. They may not even be asked to, because a fatwa is merely an opinion. It is not a legal or moral obligation. It doesn't have to be obeyed. But that has not stopped clerics from issuing absolutely bizarre fatwas. In 2005, a fatwa was issued against tennis star Sania Mirza. It asked her to wear proper clothes, or she would be stopped from playing the game. Then, in 2008, Malaysia's top Islamic Council issued a fatwa against tomboys. The body said that teenage girls who dress like men should be punished, calling their lifestyle against the order of nature. In 2014, a religious watchdog in the UAE issued a fatwa against living on Mars. The body warned Muslims against opting for any future Mars missions, saying Islam does not permit traveling to the red planet. There is a fatwa against Mickey Mouse too. In 2018, a Saudi cleric called the Disney icon a soldier of Satan, a repulsive, corrupting creature that deserved to die. And in June this year, a Bangladeshi cleric issued a fatwa against the haha emoji in a Facebook post. Why? Because he felt the emoji was disrespectful, that it is used to ridicule people on social media. How did people respond? By using the same emoji to respond to his suggestion. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.